Assalamu alaikum, dear students. How are you? Welcome back after a long break. Welcome to today's fourth year honors class. Previously, I took 4 classes, as many as 4 classes on Art of Darkness. Today, I am going to talk about poetry. You have a course named 20th Century Poetry. Paper code is 241103. You have got as many as 4 poems: The Lake Isle of Innisfree, Easter 1916, The Second Coming, Sailing to Byzantium. I think you have got 4 poems of different characteristics or subject matter. So you have got wide range of variations regarding your interest of study on Y.B.Yeats. Before going to today's class, I would like to share a few interesting things about Y.B.Yeats and our great Bengali or Indian Nobel laureate in literature, Rabindranath Tagore. Actually, both were contemporary poets. Rabindranath Tagore was born in 1861, and William Butler Yeats was born in June 13, 1865. They both travel around Imperial London at the same time. Both were involved in cultural and political movements representing their own country. Both the poets were interested in spirituality, poetry, and music. Both the poets used landscape and nature, especially in their poetic images. And both the poets were partially or greatly influenced by Romanticism or Romantic revival. Actually, few critics identified Rabindranath Tagore as a soul or solo romantic in Bengali literature. On the other hand, few critics identified Y.B.Yeats as the last romantic. And as far as their political views are concerned, they both were anti-colonialists, though they were half-hearted anti-colonialists. Actually, they both shared poor performances. So few critics actually identify them with wise imperialism, the term called wise imperialism. Y.B.Yeats were pivotal or key to Celtic or Celtic revival that is called Celtic twilight. On the other hand, Rabindranath Tagore was pivotal to seek the position of Bengali poetry in global circumference or under the shadow of colonial circumference. So he tried hard to establish the position of Bengali poetry in the larger circumference of global poetry. Anyway, now I am going to discuss about Yeats's childhood, family, tradition, religious and political views. So I'm going to share a few informations which would help you to understand W.B. Yeats's poetry. Not for today, not for your fourth year honors class, but also for the forthcoming future when you would be dealing with W.B. Yeats in your master's syllabus. So once you read today's information or go through today's information thoroughly, I think it will help you to understand Yeats's poetry or Yeats's outlook, views, and thoughts as a poet, especially at the footing of First World War and his lifelong struggle to fix his identity and to seek Ireland's freedom. So William Butler Yeats first come to Anglo-Irish tradition. So William Butler Yeats was born in a Dublin suburb on June 13, 1865, into a professional middle-class family. He belonged to the Anglo-Irish Protestant minority. Descended largely of English, Scots, or Huguenot stock, and settled there for almost 300 years. The time is or was very important. They were actually settled in Ireland in the wake of Elizabeth I and Cromwell's bloody reconquest of Ireland in the 16th and 17th century. So they have been there for almost 300 years. Though they were minority, Yeatses belonged to Protestant minority, but they felt themselves as Irish as much as British. So both the identity were there in W.B. Yeats. It nevertheless had many of the characteristics of a colonial settler establishment and remained largely aloof from the Catholic, originally Gaelic speaking native population. So there were a certain rift certain differences regarding their outlook or views towards freedom. The Catholic majority had lost most of its land to the Anglo-Irish aristocracy, who were then identified as the ascendancy. So the ascendancy drew its livelihood largely from rents from its estates and was based in the great country houses celebrated in poems such as ancestral houses. So they used to rent those ancestral houses and earn money. The ascendancy found its careers in the higher echelons of the military, colonial, and civil services. So the British government relied or believed the Protestant minority than the Gaelic-speaking Catholic majority. Lady Augusta Gregory, for example, Yeats' patron and friend, whose cruel part is evoked in several of his poems, was widow of the governor of Ceylon, and her son Robert died as a major in the British Air Force. So they sacrificed their life in the British Air Force. At the same time, particularly in the north, which is also important to know, a class of small landowning Protestant farmers had prospered. Both those classes, or these classes, were sustained by the trading and professional strata from which Yeats's own family derived. So for W.B. Yeats, it was important to establish the Protestant strand in Irish nationalism. It mattered, for example, that his great-grandfather, the Reverend John Yeats, the rector of Drumcliff in Sligo, was, as W.B. Yeats says one of his poems called Introductory Rhymes, Robert Emmet spends 100-year-old memory to the poor. So who was Robert Emmet? He was a revolutionist who was actually executed in 1803 for leading a rebellion against British rule. And John Yeats, W.B. Yeats' great-grandfather, was himself imprisoned briefly under suspicion of supporting the rebellion. The Protestant tradition also in the 18th century supplied several of Yeats' literary heroes. Few of will be read by you in different courses. So those political heroes are theorist Edmund Burke, the satirist Jonathan Swift, poet and playwright Oliver Goldsmith, and the philosopher Bishop Berkeley. They are all celebrated in various poems of W.B. Yeats. Now come to W.B. Yeats' childhood. In 1867, Yeats' father abandoned a promising law career and enrolled in a London art school with the intention of being a painter. So from then on, he used to lead a bohemian life, which actually John Yeats' mother, Susan Mary, didn't ever like. And he was greatly influenced by Charles Darwin and Stuart Mill, and he exchanged his Christian belief in favor of their views. So radical breaks with convention eventually fostered W.B. Yeats' development as a poet. And there arose deep rift between his parents, which actually dragged him deep into some sort of impoverished state or circumstances, and weakened his ties to his forefathers' faith. As a child who divided his time between London and visits to family back home, he grew sharply conscious of the conflicts that alienated colonial Ireland from imperial Britain, and that within Ireland divided Protestant descendants of British settlers from their usually less powerful and poorer Catholic neighbors. Though Yeats' mother, Susan Mary, came from a prosperous Protestant family called Colexpan's family of County Sligo, and as well as you know, his father came of a long line of well-off merchants, government officials, landowners, and Church of Ireland and clergymen. His mother didn't like his father's artistic bohemian life, as I said before. So she disliked living in London and resented the financial hardships and loss of social position. She considered his husband's position, W.B. Yeats' father's position, as unprofitable and vaguely disreputable. She gradually retreated into a miserable, speechless, and bedridden state, especially brought on by desperation and depression, and by a series of strokes. That Hassan had died in 1900 at the age of 58. It was a profound sense of shock to W.B. Yeats. Yeats's father, John Butler Yeats, might have minimized his family's hardship had he been able to sold his paintings. But he failed to sell his painting. So his artistic talents virtually failed miserably. Income from house property and some modest farms sank drastically after 1863. In 1880, his property was earning next to nothing. By 1888, it had all been sold, the proceeds consumed by debt. Then came another dramatic change in the political scenario of Ireland. Landing was encouraging poor and most Catholic tenants farmers all over Ireland to protest their lot by taking concerted action against their usually Protestant landlords and sometimes engaged in violent intimidation. Though many landlords responded by evicting their tenants, the land war eventually led to legislative concessions that limited rents and provided funds to assist tenants in purchasing the land they bought. The Yeats were actually, the family of W.B. Yeats was one of many Protestant landowning families whose status was diminished by this process. Such diminishment in the form of unpaid bills and somewhat shabby residency amplified their household tensions. It undeniably marked the attitudes of the boy, W.B. Yeats, who would later write such poem as Upon a House Shaken by the Land Agitation. While the deprivation imposed by the war and his family's break with convention forced Yeats to live out part of his boyhood in dingy urban exile, the Yeats's family also sent him to Sligo, the Western Irish seaport home of the Polexpans. After his father's departure for London, lack of money repeatedly obliged the family to take refuge with the Susansius parents. Yeats's brother Jack, eventually one of the most distinguished artists, actually painters of the 20th century, passed most of his life in Sligo. So they grew accustomed to studying in their grandparents' house for months on, and especially during their earliest years in summers. So it was a very congenial atmosphere for the development of W.B. Yeats as a romantic poet. That house, Merville, was an impressive one. Rumi mentioned on 60 acres at the edge of the town, where in addition to their grandparents, the young Yeats mixed with a large complement of aunts, uncles, and servants. So, the social interaction was also important, along with the guidance of the nature. Although the Polexpans were seen as socially inferior to Sligo's landed gentry, their wealth was considerable. For the time being, their economic condition was secure, deriving from mid-sized manufacturing and shipping interests unaffected by the land war. Merville exposed the Yeats' children to solid material comforts and, more importantly, some of the most breathtaking countryside in Ireland. East of Sligo, the waters of Lough Gill lapped the shores of many small islands, which actually provoked Yeats to write a fine romantic poem like The Lake Isle of Innisfree, free from the hobnob of London, free from the clamors and confusions of bustling city life. In the north, waterfalls cascaded down the slopes of Ben Gulben, under which stood the fine church of Drumcliff, where Yeats's great-grandfather had been rector once, and where the poet himself would be buried. To the west lay the cane-topped summit of Naknaria, the fishing village of Roses. Then stretches the wide open sea. Both Yeats's earlier and later works make it clear that these places solaced him in deep and lasting ways, and his source of music. And yet his Sligo sojourns didn't wholly allay his anxieties. After every restoring voyage of the West, there was another painful return to London, and such oscillation made him wonder if he truly belonged in either places. So it created confusion. At times, being in Sligo and the tension living in London, tension of living in London. In London, he was the shy, daydreaming son of a disconsolate mother and an apparently unsuccessful father. At his school, he was placed near the bottom of his class in most subjects and was derided by his classmates for being unathletic and Irish. In Sligo, he communed with soul-restoring beauty, but could not escape some awareness of the fact that his Anglo-Irish family's connections to the beauty were less time-honored than those of the Catholic servants and laborers they employed. And their lives went back for centuries. So they had strong ties, those servants and Yeats's family members. And their disadvantageous position reflected in their ancestors' displacement by British settlers. So the servants came from the Gaelic spoken people, and there were differences between them. They were living in this advantaged position, which actually were reflected by the ancestors of W.B. Yeats. A more immediate source of anxiety was the atmosphere of Mayville. The Pollexfans were a moody, taciturn family. Chief among them was Yeats's grandfather, William Pollexfan. He was a very brave, rigid, and very authoritative. So he never liked timid people. Yeats's later poem and autobiographies celebrate his heroism, but to the sensitive child, he was a forbidding figure who presided over a strictly governed household filled with unspoken frustration. So Yeats were unable to go beyond any kind of rules and regulation imposed by their grandfather. In 1881, John Butler Yeats returned to his family to Ireland, where they stayed for 6 years before uprooting back to London. They spent first part of that 6 years at Howth, a scenic coastal village near Dublin. It was during that period the teenage Yeats began to formulate tentative responses to the conflicts that unsettled his country, his family, and his psyche. That he initially opted art school is testament to his father's early influences. But by 1886, he had abandoned painting and was gathering his nerve to make his own way as a writer. So now come to early religious and political views of William Butler Yeats, which is also related with his own view of nationalism, actually which was quite different from his father, that of his father's view. Spiritual impulses stayed yet into writing. People became detached from religion largely because of the stunning discoveries of 19th century science about the earth phase, the existence of now extinct species, human evolution, and so on. So Charles Darwin created a great impact on W.B.Yeats' mind. Those discoveries made it difficult to accept the Bible or other traditional religious authorities as face value. His father's skepticism was not common, but by no means unparalleled. Yeats found his father's forcefully expressed views difficult to ignore, but also possessed an unquenchable desire for some of the spiritual wholeness capable of easing the world. So Yeats actually tried to find a soul entity, a powerful entity, which he thought was controlling everything. His father's influences and his narrow conventionality he encountered both in Protestantism and Catholicism had combined his aversion towards the mainstream religious institutions and their official orthodoxy. But he couldn't share his father's agnosticism, and by late adolescence, he had already rejected both conventional Christianity and scientific materialism. So the time of his late adolescence was very important. It was too early for him to fix his religious outlook or views. He kept insisting on intuitive spiritual truths inaccessible to his father's outlook, and he embarked on a lifelong search for the secret. Symbolically expressed wisdom, he believed the world's various orthodox and unorthodox religious traditions might have been common. So he turned to Buddhism and ancient Hinduism. At the high school and then during his art school, he friends like the visionary poets and artists like George Russell. He was a nationalist mystic who published under the pseudonym A.E. And it was from him that he derived his first encouragement to link his interest in the occult to a political as well as an artistic vision. So his interest towards occult, something hidden, something mysterious, something enigmatic and his political view and artistic vision were greatly influenced by George Russell. For George Russell or for A.E., the ancient Irish were visionary people, and their spiritual world was linked with that of Buddhism and the theosophy, which had become fashionable in the airy-fairy circle which the two moved. The conjunctions was to be crucial one in Yeats' development as a poet. Soon he began to join and organize hermetical societies. And when the fetish melange of Eastern and Western mystical law, known as theosophy, swept Dublin's occult circles in 1885, he immersed himself eagerly. He found that a concern with magic and ritual, astral bodies, and occult ceremonies, which appealed to his anti-scientific bent. At the age of 20, he was a founder member of the Dublin Hermetic Society, a secret order devoted to the study of Oriental religions and the writing supposedly by the ancient Greco-Egyptian sage Hermes Trismegistus. 2 years later, in 1887, he joined the London Lodge of the Theosophy, a sect of spiritualists based on the revelations of the charismatic charlatan Madame Blavatsky. And he continued his study of Buddhist and Hindu traditions as filtered by her and her followers. Although he always preserved some of his father's skepticism, he also experimented with magic and attended seance. So he involved himself in some sort of spiritual activities according to his own view, experiencing great shock on one occasion when a spirit actually seemed to possess him for several moments. So he believed it. He was actually captured by a particular spirit. These experiences eventually affected not only the substance of Yeats's work, but also more fundamentally what he perceived them to be. For him, there was a tantalizing similarity between the aesthetic wholeness created by a poem and the harmonizing supernatural of the magical spell. So the supernaturality at times influenced Yeats's development as a poet. That is why he used symbols to evoke mysterious forces that promise to fit life's broken fragments into a deeper hidden unity. Now come to his political views and nationalism, which is always very important to understand W.B. Yeats' poetry, because his sense of nationalism is always interrelated with his sense as a visionary poet. The urge to concert his broken life to a greater unity soon leads Yeats to write in sympathy with those whose vision of a united Ireland demanded reduced or severe ties to Britain. So Yeats also were influenced by those people who wanted to sever their ties to Britain. John O'Leary was one of them who inspired the commitment, the bookish former revolutionary who became the young poet's political mentor in 1885. O'Leary urged him to foster coherent national culture by emulating Thomas Davies and other poets associated with the young Ireland who had come to fame in 1880 by writing popular patriotic verses about Ireland in English language. So the language was English, but the patriotism were portrayed for Ireland. So Yeats's taste was the militancy of the Young Ireland movement, which under the pressure of the Great Famine of the 1840s rejected O'Connell's constitutionalism in favor of physical force and attempted an insurrection in 1884, a year of revolution throughout Europe. Drawn largely from the urban professional classes, many of them Protestant, the young Irelanders left behind a residue of cultural nationalism, song, and story, which was to set an example for the young years. So, all the parts of Ireland, no matter whether from the Catholic or Protestant minority, started writing poems to actually spark the fuel of revolution or to ignite the fuel of revolution. O'Leary's influence was crucial, but Yeats's father also modeled his politics. Unlike most members of Protestant families, and despite his losses during the Land War, John Butler Yeats didn't embrace unionism. Unionism, actually. That set of political and social conventions or convictions centering on the preservation of Ireland's political union with Great Britain. Such union also preserved the privileged status of the descendants of the colonists who had crossed the Irish Sea during the centuries. Old effort to merge Catholic Ireland with Protestant Britain's empire. He didn't, however, approve the aggressive tactics of the Landleague or of Charles Stuart Parnell, the leader of the Irish party in the British Parliament. Parnell used his control over both the Landleague and the Irish party to maneuver the British Parliament to the verge of granting Home Rule, which could give Ireland its own partly autonomous legislature. John Butler Yeats, W.B.Yeats' father, supported Home Rule, but believed that pursuing it by threatening means were actually violating the code of an Irish Protestant gentleman. Though his son would later experiment with more radical political ideas, he remained conditioned by his father's instinct about Home Rule and Irish Protestant gentility. Yeats's early poems typically offer chivalric allegory that meditates on the complexities of Irish politics and avoid direct calls for real-world insurrections. Yeats's politics were also conditioned by his meditations on the contrast between London's deprivation and Sligo's more attractive physical and cultural landscapes. By the late 1880s, his hatred for the city of his exile had less to do with mere poverty or the humiliation of being singled out as Irish than with the new understanding of London, and more generally England, because he had been deprived of England's own most radical artists and intellectuals. So the separation. between the intellectuals and artists of England with W.B. Yeats emphasized Yeats's own view in favor of London. So he always liked and supported the outlook and views of Irish people. In addition to being the center of a global empire that included Ireland, England was also the cradle of the Industrial Revolution and capitalism, the home of factory-free, slum-ridden, bustling, wealthy cities. So England never inspired W.B. Yeats as an ideal place to live in. Its association with the enslaving, soul-demanding consequences of empire, mass production, and laissez-faire social policies had long been described by a vibrant countercultural tradition stretching from such romantic poets as Blake and Shelley forward to the critic John Ruskin and to the so-called free Raphaelite group of artists. Their emphasis on individual imagination and preference for pre-industrial modes of life and art had inspired John Butler Yeats' artistic inspiration. So we see the clear differences between John Butler Yeats' inspiration and his son's W.B. Yeats' inspiration. Steeping himself in this tradition, and in particular in the aesthetic and political doctrines of William Morris, Yeats associated England with everything he loathed about the modern world. So completely, there we see the opposite view. So he associated England with imperialism, with urban ugliness and squalor. And his association with Ireland was with beauty, with ideals, with old tradition. So Ireland, by contrast, appeared unpolished, beautiful place where people lived according to age-old traditions and hold onto magical, time-honored beliefs. Ireland's remote western region held special importance because of West's comparative isolation from the British influence. So the west of Ireland was completely isolated from British influence. Many of its people spoke Irish, and many more preserved distinctively Irish stories and values. By his early 20s, Yeats was searching for the answer to his spiritual and political questions in the folk beliefs of Ireland's western country people and in the heroic myths of the whole Ireland's Gaelic culture, which actually never attracted W.B. Yeats' father, John Butler Yeats. These traditions, he felt, preserved satisfying ways of life and eternal spiritual truths that had been forgotten in modernized days like England, and that were continuously threatened by England. According to W.B. Yeats, even in Ireland, there was certain encroachment of British culture. From novels to political cartoons, Englishmen stereotyped the Irish as irrational, effeminate, and drunken. In other words, as unfit to govern themselves. So Irish people were less important than the British people to imperial Britain to employ them to civil services. So they never liked, or they never thought that Irish people were eligible or fit to serve England or Britain. During his early years, Yeats sought to counter such stereotypes by presenting Ireland, and especially its ancient and rural aspects, as full of beauty and passionate heroism. He thus also laid a foundation for building his own satisfying national identity. So I think, and if you read W.B. Yeats's poetry properly, you will be able to know that actually his bent towards Ireland as a standard place for passionate heroism or beauty was overpowering, which actually influenced him to support Ireland or to give some sort of extra favor to Ireland. The Irish Republican Brotherhood was founded in 1858 to seek independence by physical force. So it was a dramatic change in Irish political trend. The IRB, or the Irish Republican Brotherhood, resorted to physical force to free Ireland. As a young man, Yeats himself was a member of the IRB. He despised what he saw as the hypocritical religiosity of the Catholic lower middle classes who had turned against Parnell. By contrast, he celebrated the heroic solitude of men such as Parnell and Grattan, who seemed to represent an alternative aristocratic tradition with which we could identify. So, what W.B.Yeats thinks about rebellion is also important. But today, I'm not going to discuss about it. In Easter 1960, I will discuss thoroughly about Yeats' own outlook, vision, thought about rebellion or revolution. So today, I am going to conclude my lecture. Hope you have looked at this screen and you have noted what is necessary for you to understand W.B.Yeats' poetry. In the forthcoming class, I will start with the poem Easter 1960. Though I started the poem in the class, but I was unable to finish it so far I can remember. I will not discuss about the Lake Elephant Tree because I have already discussed this poem. So I will try to finish my lectures on W.B.Yeats in the forthcoming 2 classes. Then I will start another one. So till then, you have to maintain all the rules and regulations to keep you safe and secure. Especially, you have to keep away coronavirus. Wear masks, wash your hand whenever you touches anything outside. Don't go to crowded places. Don't go close to people who are not wearing masks, because current crisis is not safe for you to roam outside and to mix with people whenever you like. Stay at home, stay safe, study seriously and devotedly, because this time will never exist forever. Hopefully, in the forthcoming days, we will be able to overcome the current situation. And you have to appear in the exams. So don't waste your time. Read seriously and think about your future. Welcome to my next classes. Till then, goodbye. Stay safe, stay sound, stay healthy. Thank you.